Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, how are you doing? All good, I hope. I'm doing well. I've been doing heaps of planning and prep for the podcast this week. There's so much exciting stuff coming up. I've got some wonderful conversations in the can that I'll be sharing over the next couple of months, and some hopefully interesting and inspiring solo episodes too. Plus, there's going to be a little Me Made May mini-series on the horizon to help participants or potential participants get the most from their personal challenges. I've been sewing up a storm lately as well. I've never done any kind of study, but I wonder if I'm more productive during the winter when I'm spending less time outside. I don't know. What about you? Do you find that you're more productive in lighter, warmer months or darker, colder months? Anyway, over the last week or so, I've made something really fun for my next Free Pattern Friday post on my Sozo blog. So that will be dropping on the blog and my Sozo blog Instagram feed on Friday. With the leftovers from that project, I made my husband and son a pair of undies each, which I'll share very soon as well. Plus, I've almost finished a scrap-busting bucket hat from my husband, and I've been doing some paid sewing work for Fabric Godmother, making a Nova coat sample for them. When the coat and the hat are done, I'll get back to my ginger jeans and put the waistband and belt loops on those to finish those up. Sustainability-wise, nothing new to report, I'm embarrassed to say. We had some crazy storms over the last week and my broad bean plants took quite a battering. I'm keeping my fingers firmly crossed that they pull through. I've been doing a little bit of seed sharing though, sending some extras to a couple of friends in advance of the growing season. I can't wait to start filling my window ledges with little pots of soil and seeds. So, thanks heaps to new podcast supporters Denise and Serena. I'm very grateful to both of you for signing up via Patreon. Making a weekly podcast takes a bonkers amount of work, so if you would like to support the efforts going on to put out regular episodes, please consider signing up if you are able. Details on how to do so are in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. Right, episode 31. This one features a conversation I had with Australian designer Liz Haywood. I've been following Liz's work for about 2 years now, which is about the amount of time that has passed since Liz decided to exclusively produce sewing patterns using the zero waste principle. If you're not entirely sure what zero waste sewing patterns are all about, please pop this episode on pause and go and listen to episode 17 called What Are Zero Waste Sewing Patterns before you listen to this one. Liz has created an entire book of zero waste patterns, as well as a sizable range of standalone patterns for garments, accessories, and even for a doll, all of which will result in no or very little wasted fabric. She's been exploring and pushing the genre forward in really significant ways, as you'll hear in this conversation. Okay, enjoy! Oh, Liz, thank you so much for doing this. And I apologise for our dramas, but we've made it. So what time is it there?
10 to 9.
10 to 9. Oh, bless you.
It's okay.
Late. I love following your work related to zero waste patterns. And I'm sure that many listeners already know of you and your work. But for those that don't, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Zoe. I am a fan of yours and I love this podcast. I live in Australia and I used to be an industry pattern maker, but now I've been home for about the past decade because I now live in the country.
So these days your work focuses on zero waste patterns, but you've also worked in garment manufacture for 20 years before producing your books and patterns. Is that right?
Yes.
Awesome. So you had a really interesting conversation on the So Organised Style podcast back in January 2021, and you went into loads of detail about your fascinating career. So I really recommend that everybody goes and listens to that episode, and I'm going to link that in the show notes. So at what point did you discover zero waste patterns?
The Dressmaker's Companion was published in 2017, but a year before that, that was when I discovered zero waste, because I read a book called Shaping Sustainable Fashion, which was a collection of essays on how we can make fashion more sustainable.
Oh, very cool.
And there was an essay in there by Holly McQuillan on zero waste cutting.
Yeah.
And I thought, I could do this.
Really? There's something clicked about it, like I have to try this.
Yeah. And then, when you read something by an author, you look them up to see what else they've written.
Yeah.
And the book Zero Waste Fashion Design had just come out.
The one she wrote with Timo Riisanen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who happened to be one of the editors of the Shaping Sustainable Fashion book.
Right.
And I got it from the library. I remember opening it. I just felt this shiver of excitement.
Really? You're like, oh, this is it. I'm home.
I think so. I've seen a lot of waste in clothing factories and created a lot of it myself.
Right.
Not on purpose, because factories are very tight with fabric.
Yeah, they don't want to waste it if they can help it, do they?
That's true. It's going to happen. So if you don't deal with the waste in the design process, there's always going to be waste. Even with the best fabric optimization software in the whole world, you'll still have it there. But back then we didn't know about zero waste. In factories, it can be easy to override things with other concerns.
Right, sure. So you decided you were just going to start playing around, or what was the next step after reading those books?
So I already had a blog going, and so I did some experiments and I wrote about them on my blog.
Oh, cool.
And so I did that for a few years. I started with quite simple shapes, and I looked at a lot of historic cutting layouts. They're kind of hidden in books about historic and folk traditional clothing. You have to dig to find them.
Right.
There's no one book on all of them, but, we had a library. I just kept borrowing books. Yeah, actually, I had my own spot on the holds trolley. I just borrowed a lot of books.
Really amazing. Like, that's your whole shelf, Liz's shelf.
Yes, and they're always heavy books, aren't they?
Yeah.
Fashion books.
So would you say, I'm struggling to find a term for the kind of pattern cutting that uses blocks as the basis, because I don't know if we can call it traditional, because technically zero waste pattern design kind of came first, didn't it? So how do you differentiate between those two approaches when you're discussing pattern cutting?
I call it traditional pattern cutting, the kind with blocks and everything like that.
Yeah.
Modern zero waste pattern cutting kind of comes under creative pattern cutting in a way.
Okay. So how do you feel that all your training and all your experience in traditional pattern cutting, how do you feel that that's like helped or possibly hindered your ability to kind of create zero waste patterns?
I think it's helped a lot.
Right.
In Australia, and it might be different now, but at the places I work, there was a lot less separation between roles.
Right.
So we didn't have creative pattern makers and technical pattern makers. That was just pattern makers. And the pattern making department made patterns and did fittings and did all the pattern grading, and also what's called garment tech, which is kind of like garment specifications.
Sure.
They're kind of done in conjunction with sample machinists.
Right.
And I had no idea that these were different jobs until I worked in London. I was working in one place and I said, when do we start grading these? And they said, oh no, we send our grading out. And it was manual grading. It wasn't like they didn't have the computers to do it. It was before lots of computerized grading was done.
Yeah.
And garment tech was a whole career.
Yeah.
And we just didn't have that in Australia. So that makes you very versatile if you're doing lots of different types of work. So I've found that very, very helpful. Having said that, I think you can start learning zero waste pattern cutting alongside traditional pattern cutting. I don't think you need to wait until you've had a 30-year career in traditional industry before you can start.
Yeah, that's handy. Okay, so how would you start to create a zero waste sewing pattern? Is it an idea for a garment you've had first, or you've just got a bit of paper and you've started to play? Like, how does the process work for you?
Well, sometimes I see pictures in magazines of people wearing clothes, or just down the street, someone wearing something, and I think, I bet I could do that zero waste.
Oh.
Like a little challenge, yeah. Or there was one time when my husband said, I bet you can't make a bum bag zero waste. And I said, I bet I can.
You threw down the gauntlet.
I won. Pass me that sketch pad, yes. And sometimes I get an idea for a cutting layout.
Yeah.
And I write it in my sketchbook in case I want to use it later.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works first time, and sometimes I have to work hard to make it work.
Yeah.
I love it when it sort of gets nailed first go, but I also like the challenge of sort of sorting through to make it work.
So what was the first zero waste pattern that you created that you decided to release? Was that one of the ones that ended up in your book, or was it one of these standalone patterns?
First one that was published is the first pattern in the book, which is a tie front top.
Right, cool. I love that one.
I've just re-released it in a lot more sizes. It took me 3 years to tweak how I could increase the size range.
Yeah, I want to get back to grading. That's a really good point. So we'll put a pin in that.
Okay.
That was your first zero waste pattern that you developed?
Yes. I developed, I think, about 26 patterns for that book, and then had a massive edit and got it down to ones that I thought should be in there.
Yeah.
You got to be ruthless.
Yeah, definitely. So have there been any patterns that you've started to make that have just defied you and you've not been able to make it work yet?
Yep, plenty. There was meant to be a jumpsuit in the book and just didn't, among others.
So there's been a real surge of interest in zero waste patterns for home sewing in the last couple of years, hasn't there? What do you think's caused that?
I think the pandemic has fast forwarded a lot of interest in zero waste and sustainable things in general. I think we can expect to see more zero waste patterns as designers get used to this way of designing.
Mm-hmm.
With modern zero waste sewing patterns that you can buy, I would guess that there would be more than 100, but certainly less than 200, which is just hardly anything compared to other patterns.
Yeah, it kind of makes me feel like the whole kind of zero waste pattern home sewing sector, or niche for want of a better word, it kind of reminds me how the whole home sewing kind of indie pattern vibe was about maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's still quite kind of manageable, and yeah, it's not quite as overwhelming yet, is it?
Yes, it's small, and it's a really nice community too, and kind and quite open and sharing.
Do you think it's such a lovely sharing community because there's a real kind of underlying philosophy towards kind of making improvements in clothing and reducing waste, and that kind of comes before any sense of competition, for example?
The fashion industry is traditionally kind of closed and keeps their secrets.
Yeah.
But with zero waste fashion design, Holly and Timo recognised early on that we're going to have to be very transparent and sharing ideas if we're going to move this forward.
Yeah.
So I think it's in the spirit of that's how this community has come along.
Wonderful. So to your knowledge, is the kind of rise of interest in zero waste sewing patterns or zero waste garment creation, do you think that's also present in commercial mass-produced clothing industries?
It's not so prevalent in manufacturing. A zero-waste clothing factory has just opened in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh.
Maybe it's the first one. I don't think there are very many around. But zero-waste pattern cutting is very transferable to other things that use textiles. For example, toys or home decor or quilting or handbags or any kind of bag. And certainly in all of these there's already sustainable actions going on.
Yeah.
Like using upcycled materials, for example, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of untapped potential, I think, in areas other than clothes as well.
Yeah, definitely, because you've just released an amazing zero waste doll pattern, haven't you? With its own beautiful little zero and low waste wardrobe. That's incredible. So you've already shown that there is so much more potential than just garments. So what about menswear, for example? Because I kind of feel so many of the shapes that are created using zero waste methods, they can be often quite kind of boxy silhouettes with a fair bit of designies. I'm wondering, do you think that we'll see more of a rise of zero waste patterns specifically aimed at men or gender neutral individuals?
I think we might. I've tried it out myself doing gender neutral clothes. But the thing I ran up against was it doesn't really suit women with big busts.
Right.
And big busts tend to come on big women, and doing big sizes is important to me. So my end thoughts with it were that I'm going to design men's clothes and women's clothes, and if it turns out to be gender neutral, then it's a happy day.
Yeah.
I'll take gender neutral if I can find it, but I think it's working out what's important to you.
Yeah. let's go back to the point that we were starting to make earlier about grading, because there's a claim that some people have made about zero waste patterns is that they're hard to grade across a wide range of sizes. And in fact, some zero waste patterns, they're kind of released in just one size only, aren't they? But you seem to have nailed grading, because you have a really broad range of sizes, don't you? In fact, your tie front top is available, for example, between 32-inch bust and 70-inch bust. So how on earth is it possible to create that range of sizes but still retain the zero waste aspect of those patterns?
That's a good question. I was already an experienced grader and had also done lots of fittings on big size women. And as I've gotten more confident with zero waste, I've done more sizes. So the zero waste sewing book had 11 sizes in it. I thought that was pretty hot stuff.
I mean, that is pretty good. That's pretty good. There's a lot of sewing pattern books anyway, aren't they? We're using regular methods.
Then I went to 12 sizes. And then the next patterns after that, I went to 15 and then 17 and then 19. And then I got to 20 sizes. But it's been a gradual process.
Yeah. So how does that work? Because as I know, as you mentioned in the other podcast, when you go to bigger and smaller sizes, it's not just a case of, increasing the percentage, is it? The shapes themselves change slightly, don't they? So how do you retain the kind of tessellation? Is it a case of you need wider fabric, or do you have to reconfigure how those shapes are going to fit together?
I have a mixture of methods I use. Sometimes I use modular pattern pieces. Sometimes I use different width fabrics.
Right.
Sometimes I cut it around the other direction.
Ah.
With zero waste and grading, the key for me really has been test fitting to allow me to do big sizes. So I test fit at least every fifth, if not every third size, because the combination of going zero waste and doing big sizes can lead to unexpected results.
Right.
So I test fit on friends who are the appropriate size, and also on any visitor that comes to the house.
Oh, really? You're here.
I have no inhibitions. If someone comes to visit and I've got something on the go, I'll say, "Excuse me, what size would you be? Would you mind just slipping this on? Oh, and can I quickly measure you?" I've never been refused.
That's good to know.
I have to say that the test fitters have opened my eyes to how hard it is to get clothes for big sizes, especially if your bust is bigger than 60 inches.
Right.
If you live in Australia, in the country, and you don't sew, there's literally nothing.
Right.
Even if you go to the city, it's really hard. It was just off my radar. I had no idea how hard it is for them to get clothes. But the test fitters are now quietly building themselves zero waste wardrobes because I use real fabric for test garments, and Brilliant. I finish them off and they keep them. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
I don't use fabric that's too special for test garments in case I get it all wrong. But pretty much always it can be finished off and someone can wear it, even if it's not like what it's going to end up at the end.
Yeah, brilliant. I love that boldness.
Yeah, just plunging with the scissors, yeah.
So do you start making a kind of for want of a better word, a medium, and then you grade in both directions?
I make a size that fits me.
Right.
So I can try it on and wear it a bit and check it. But in the back of my head, I've already got how I'm going to make bigger sizes.
Wow.
So because you have to think about it while you're making the pattern. So when you're making a zero waste pattern, you're kind of doing four things. You're making the pattern, you're designing the pattern, like designing the garment, you're doing the grading, and you're making the cutting layout. So it takes a lot longer, but you're doing four things at the same time.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin with any of those, let alone simultaneously. That's amazing.
I'm a flat pattern maker. I'm not really good with draping. I tend to prefer working with paper and fabric rather than making them on the computer because I'm old.
Okay, so I have another question. There is an argument that zero waste patterns are harder to fit than regular patterns. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any tips?
My thoughts are yes, they are harder to adjust and fit because the cutting layout is the pattern. So it's very hard to merge sizes. So if you wanted a size 14 dress with size 16 hips, if you change the pattern, then it affects the pieces around it because the cutting layout is the whole thing. Designers can address this with how they make the pattern.
Right.
So they could put, we can put big side seams, deeper hems. We could put fitting advice in sewing instructions and anticipate the type of alterations that people might need to make, for example, for pear-shaped people or short people. Having said that, most of my patterns have 1 centimetre seam allowance, but this is what I'm incorporating as I keep going.
That's interesting. That's such a good point. Yeah, you could make those side seams because a lot of alterations are done kind of at the side, aren't they?
Most are. It makes it easier to go just if you just want to go a size bigger. Because size inclusivity is not just about making lots of big sizes, but it's about shape as well.
Sure.
And all the different body shapes and sizes we have.
Yeah. So how do you think about that when you're making patterns?
It's something that I'm thinking about more and more, especially as I am seeing people make my patterns on Instagram and perhaps suggest things. Like I made a skirt, but I'm very pear-shaped and I had to do this adjustment and here's how it worked out, that kind of thing.
Yeah, interesting. It sounds like such a journey. You've been on such a journey and you're still on such a journey.
I think it's been the most creative time of my career ever.
Amazing.
Maybe this is what it's been pointing to all this time.
Brilliant. So what is it about zero? Because you've decided now, I think I read somewhere, perhaps on your blog, that you are now committed to zero waste patterns. Is that right? You don't feel you can't foresee yourself producing patterns kind of through the traditional method.
That's right. I've gone hardcore. So 2 years ago, I decided that I was only going to make zero waste patterns from now on. And interestingly, I'm still creating scraps, but way, way, way less scraps than I ever made before.
Yeah, and presumably your scraps are a lot more kind of rectangular, or, they could be potentially pieced together or something like that easily.
Yes, the type of scrap I'm producing is less because it's all quite usable rectangular shapes. And most of the time it's just, when you order fabric online and you have to buy it in 25 centimetre increments, so you've always got a bit left over, it's that kind of thing.
Sure.
As for other scraps like overlocker trimmings and just strips you cut off the side and things like that, is hardly anything. And I make between 55 and 90 items a year.
Wow.
And I wouldn't even create enough scraps to stuff a cushion.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah. And if I had, the closet core poof.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would take the rest of my life to fill one of them. My scrap generation has just gone way down. They're very usable scraps.
That's amazing. And now you've got your amazing zero waste dolls. If there are any overlocker scraps or whatever, they can go in there, can't they?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So when you've got your rectangular scraps, what do you use those for?
Well, I separate them into 2 bins. One's prints, one's plains. And actually I find I dip into them quite a lot for pocket bags and small things. And at home we went through a Minecraft cushion phase in the school. I think it was in one of the lockdowns, Minecraft cushion, which are inherently zero waste because it's only squares.
Yeah.
And so the plains bin got depleted of greens and browns.
Well, that must have been very pleasing.
Yeah.
So you're committed to only producing zero waste patterns. Do you still make other people's regular patterns?
No, except hats.
Right.
Zero waste hats are a very high calling. Yeah, I've managed to make 1 zero waste hat. It was a tie-on visor, but I don't know. I don't know how to do them. Right. It's someone else's ministry.
Yeah. So what are your hopes for zero waste design?
For myself?
Yeah, why not? Or more broadly, whatever you feel like, however you feel like answering that.
I feel like, in a way, I'm like a self-appointed ambassador for zero waste.
Well, you're definitely at the forefront, for sure.
I'm an early adopter. I want to keep pushing the boundaries with zero waste patterns and seeing what we can make with them. I would love to see it transfer into other areas where textiles are used. I'd love to see it be used in manufacturing a lot more. I would love to see people give a zero waste pattern a go. And if you find, if there's nothing that takes your fancy, keep it in the back of your mind because I foresee more and more zero waste patterns being available in the future.
Yeah, it's amazing actually, isn't it? There's lots more coming up. I've seen bra, I've seen underwear. It's quite amazing. I don't think that would necessarily suit every body type, but it's exciting, isn't it? I just made my daughter. Have you seen that there's the company called Thread Faction that make a range of children's zero waste sewing patterns?
Yes, her name is Liz as well.
Yes, another Liz. There we go.
Yeah.
I've just made my daughter the zero waste cap tee pattern and it's fantastic. It's really, really good.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
It's more of a low waste pattern than a zero waste pattern, but still it was incredible because you, like you were saying, it's designed for knit fabrics, but if you pick a fabric that's got a 4-way stretch, you can cut it crossways. So you're using basically the width of your child's body. It's so little. It's amazing. Like, it was only about 50 centimetres or something. It was incredible.
With children's patterns and also bra and underpants patterns and things that are small, the zero waste aspect relies on having modular pattern pieces, because with a home sewing pattern, you're only really going to make one at a time. So you're not going to be able to use the whole width of the fabric because the garment's small. So they're very versatile patterns, because you can move them around the fabric, and it doesn't really matter what width fabric you've got.
Yeah.
But that's great.
Yeah. I wonder if as more smaller garment patterns and children's garment patterns come out for zero waste, that could then be a really good use for those rectangles that are produced from the larger garments patterns.
Oh.
It could go ever decreasing, couldn't it?
Yeah. The scraps get used for the scraps.
Yeah. And then you're finally making the little zero waste dolls clothes at the very end.
Yes.
So you are such an inspiration, but I would love to know if there are any makers or creative businesses that inspire you.
Yes, there are. There's Foresee in New Zealand, who makes zero waste swimwear. She not only uses a recycled nylon fabric, but her cutting's zero waste. Danielle Elsner, who has just opened a zero waste clothing factory in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh, cool.
Milene of Zero Waste Design Online, who is working in industry with big manufacturers. Holly and Timo, who wrote the book that got me started.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to Holly McQuillan, but I'm a bit intimidated to approach her.
I don't think I'm the person to set up an introduction.
No, I'm not. I wasn't asking you to. I was just kind of confessing, like, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
Actually, I feel like I have a tiny in with her. It's like the smallest in imaginable. But I actually, when I was at university and I was studying fashion design, I actually went to study in New Zealand for 6 months. And I was studying at the Massey University in Wellington, and that's where she lectures. So it was not at the same time. This was millions of years ago. But I feel like maybe that's like a slight angle that I could worm my way into her inbox.
Yeah, like an old scholars thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really interesting diving into zero waste patterns with you. And I cannot wait to see what you generate next. I'm really excited.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Zoe. And best wishes with your podcast. I think it's great.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!